Welcome to the Deconstructing Data podcast and live stream. We are back with David Finkelstein, founder and CEO of Bedrock. How's it going, David?
It's going well, Jesse. Been a busy week so far. How about you?
It's been a busy week. I just hosted my first retreat, so I'm still, kind of coming down and wrapping up from all of that. But it was a really great time.
How was that?
It was good. It was really great. It was in Colorado Springs. The air was cool and fresh and crisp, and I kind of miss being in the woods and in nature. But we also were a little bit spoiled. We had a beautiful home in the middle of woods and nature. So,
Nice.
but
That's
it
awesome.
was great. So thank you for asking. And I'm excited because today we already pre-show, we're having a really great discussion with today's guests, and the audience is in for a treat. I think this is going to be a good one. But today on Deconstructing Data, we're thrilled to welcome on Collin Graves. He is the founder and CEO of North Labs. Let me bring him in here. Hi, Collin.
Hey, guys.
Hey, Collin. We appreciate you joining us today on the show. So let's jump in it and have you kick it off for us. So why don't you give our listeners and viewers a little bit of a background about you and how you came to create and start North Labs and what you guys are doing for your customers.
Yeah, happy to. So Collin Graves, I have been in the cloud space for 17 years, so a very long time. And I got started learning about the cloud actually when I was serving in the Air Force. So I do not have a traditional path to the cloud, to owning a company. But I remember walking along the flight line one day. It was frigid cold at Ellsworth. And my father sent me a news article about how Amazon was taking their data centers to the cloud. And for whatever reason, it resonated with me. And I thought, I need to learn a lot about this. And here we are 17 years later. So I started an earlier company that specialized in cloud computing with Amazon. I exited that company, consulted for a few years in and around the Bay Area, helping organizations move workloads to the cloud. And I've been running North Labs since 2016. And today our mission really is to help organizations design, implement, and maintain world-class data programs so they can build operational capabilities, operational efficiencies with their data in an era now where data is more important than it's ever been.
Mm.
That's awesome. So I love the story. And I think that you have to thank your dad, right? Because it seems like by sending you that article, he sort of launched this career for you, right?
I tell you, David, if you knew my father, you would laugh because my father is kind of a technology dinosaur in the best way. Still very good at navigating with a King's Atlas as opposed to Google Maps. Just got a smartphone about a year ago, just learned how to text on that smartphone probably 8 months ago. So it's been wild to watch his, development in this space. But of all people in my life, to introduce me to this, to something as cutting edge as the cloud back in 2008 is pretty remarkable. So yeah, he gets a lot of kudos. And really, the idea of starting a business at all is because of him as well. He had a great career at Medtronic. He helped develop the initial Keurig coffee machine with a contract manufacturing group. He's got 3 master's degrees, just a brilliant guy. But I watched him go off on his own in my teenage years. He became a master electrician and started his own electrical contracting company and quickly rose in the ranks, at least in the Minnesota area, of being like having the best reputation in that whole industry in that space for quality of work, dedication, and professionalism. And I knew early on that was the route for me. I'd have to first join one of the largest organizations on the planet in the Department of Defense. But I always knew that my road would lead me to starting and running companies. So yeah, all kudos to him.
That's cool. I give the same credit to my father as well, because my father was an entrepreneur, and again, similar to you, he rose the ranks in New York, New Jersey area, HVAC company, that he owned, and he built and designed HVAC systems for some of the biggest skyscrapers and hospitals and all kinds of stuff in New York City. So it was neat watching him as a kid and his business evolve, and I kind of always knew I was going to do the same, and be my own boss. Didn't know what it was going to be in, but I knew I wanted to be my own boss as well. So love the story, and it resonates with me for sure. Let's jump into our first topic. We put it out there about strengthening your data core. So tell us, I agree with you that it's the bedrock of any good data, of any good business, right? You need to understand your data, and it needs to be strong. So tell us about your thoughts on this topic.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I could go for a long time on this, but I won't. But for context, for the listeners, North Labs works with groups across all different industries, typically groups over 50 million in revenue up through a few billion in revenue. And more often than not, these organizations are in the manufacturing, industrial, defense and aerospace sectors. So what we consider very asset intensive industries. And if you think about data through the lens of manufacturing, for instance, we're now in an era where manufacturing produces more data than the government, which is insane. And it's not just by a little margin. It's like 13 times more than the government. And in the last 10 years, the average number of data producing systems in an average industrial organization has gone from fewer than 50, I believe the number is 48, to now over 110. And everyone understands, okay, yeah, data is important. I know that if I can create a unified view of my business, that I can make better decisions, I can drive greater efficiencies and ultimately make more money. But it's really, really difficult to get started. And most organizations find themselves relying on data in like the skinniest, slimmest capacity possible, and constantly wishing that their data would deliver greater insights to them, allow for greater automation. And now, obviously, it's no wonder to anyone, this topic du jour of Gen AI or machine learning or predictive forecasting, predictive maintenance, things like that. All of that is predicated on a solid core of data, meaning not just I've got the best tools in the industry and I just dumped all my data in and now all of a sudden I can create this ROI. It's about developing that foundation of trust within your data, because today more than ever, you've heard the term garbage in, garbage out. If I use bad data inputs for my analysis, I'm creating really bad outputs from that analysis. That's going to be detrimental to my business. We're now in an era where the risk of that accelerating is huge because we're incorporating more advanced technologies into the fold. And so my big plea, my organization's mission to just about everyone we meet is slow down to speed up. If you were building the house of your dreams, you wouldn't worry about building that third floor game room with the pinball machine and the dartboard and the little bar in the corner. First, you would grade the land, you would pour the foundation, you would lay the rebar, and you'd create stability for everything you were going to build on top of that foundation. Unfortunately, that's where most organizations skimp over because it's not differentiated, it's not sexy, right? It's not all that interesting, and they want to jump straight into the shiny bells and whistles. And that's why this industry carries about an 80 to 85% failure rate, is that most organizations are ignoring those prerequisites for what it takes to build a sound data program in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great point. And it's something we've talked about before here, the whole garbage in, garbage out, and the whole fact that everyone is so eager to use AI without the thought first about the core asset, which is the data, and making sure that data makes sense, that the data is valid and validated and it's good before you're before you're trying to implement it and use it. Otherwise, you end up with a lot of what you see today with a lot of these AI tools where the output is wrong, right? It's the reason why, you can have, a lot of these, image creators, creating people with with 6 fingers and just, 3 hands and all these crazy things, is because, they jumped so quickly to try to create tools that are using the data before actually making sure that they understand fully how the data is gonna work for the output.
You're exactly right. I mean, the only thing worse than not having data maturity in a business today, because if you're not developing your data maturity and strengthening that muscle as an organization, your competitors are, right? There's never been a greater pull for data maturity that I've ever seen in my 17 years in this space. The only thing worse than not working on it is working on the wrong thing or building it in a way that's not sustainable for the long term, right? You'd rather have no insights and have to hold your finger up to the wind like you have been doing versus a system saying, definitely steer the ship this way. This is where your destination is, when in fact, you're 90 degrees off course. And we see that a lot with organizations who have spent so much money and time and change currency within their organization, only to arrive at a point where they go, I don't trust any of this. And so we really need to tear this down and start over. That's a terrible position to find yourself in.
Yeah, no, for sure. And look, a lot of these AI, tools that people are playing with right now online, they're just, they're using them. Sometimes they're usable, sometimes they're not. And you could just refresh and regenerate and get another image. Okay, that one I could use.
Right.
But when you're talking about like using it as a core for your business to drive insights, to improve your manufacturing process or something like that, or distribution or whatever it is, that's a whole different story. Like you can't just regenerate and get a better result. Like, you're talking about, losing millions of dollars in just to find out that it didn't work. Right.
Exactly.
Exactly. Great point. So quality data, I mean, that's what everyone needs, and I could feel when you started to talk about, Collin, being in that position where you've been building all of this data for years and then you go to analyze it and it's just a bunch of garbage. I mean, you've just wasted all of that time and all that energy and all those resources to create garbage. So yeah, I mean, data quality is key. Were you going to say something? I was going to move us into the second topic.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, the worst thing that can happen is that you embark on this mission, right? I use a lot of military analogies, so apologies ahead of time, right? But we embark on this mission. It's very clearly understood. And you get to a final destination where you didn't actually accomplish anything, right? The worst position to arrive at within an immature organization is to attempt to build some maturity, but to not have that trust factor to the point where David is still pulling data from his secret system locally and analyzing the data there, as opposed to that unified view of the business that you've been working so hard to create. And we see that all of the time. Hey, I don't quite trust this analysis. I'd rather pull the raw data in and manipulate it myself inside of Excel. Right? And that comes with so much a greater risk profile, but it comes with a lot of technical debt that needs to get repaid at some point, because it means that analysis isn't available to the rest of the organization to drive behavior and to drive decision making. And all that does is slow you down. So investing all that money to be slowed down, to your point, is a terrible position to be in. It's all predicated on trust.
Yeah, that's a good point. So how do we make sure we don't get there? So from concept to impact, building a data program that delivers from day one, how do we do that?
I think there's a common misconception in this space, or at least a series of behaviors that we see a lot from organizations that have made the decision to grow in their maturity as it relates to data. most of the time, this conversation starts around tooling, right? So if you think about what's called the golden triangle from 1970s MBA lore, you have people, process, and technology is what they, back in the day, considered the biggest piece of a program of change management. Technology is actually the least important part of that triangle. But because we're in an era where new technology is released every day and technology continues to dominate headlines, oftentimes we see organizations starting with the technology problem, which means I want to select the coolest technology I can find. Then I'm going to ingest all of my data from everywhere. Then I'm going to figure out what to do with that data. And we call that boiling the ocean. In software development terms, you might call that a waterfall approach. This whole idea of let's just get it all in there and then we'll figure out what to do with it, right? Anybody who's in a position of making investments in the business knows that that is not the right way to go, because you can't possibly have a positive ROI thesis attached to that. There is nothing inherently valuable about standing up tools in an organization. It costs a lot of money. It costs a lot of personnel outlay, but there's no value thesis attached to it. So the way we like to start with organizations is when you think about your global operations today, whether it's a manufacturing group and their production, whether it's a financial services group and their assets under management or portfolio allocation, what is the biggest area of the business that is impacting your ability to move quickly the most? This goes back to the early 1990s, the theory of constraints. Every organization is comprised of different constraints. Some are big, some are small, but every business has constraints. They will always have constraints. That's the only constant. So identifying what the biggest constraint is to the business that's preventing an organization to run as efficiently as possible is where we want to start. We call that the North Star, right? Maybe it's because I'm from the North Star state originally, but we call that the North Star. Everything that we do in terms of the decision making around that, the people, process, and technology, should be obsessed about solving for that North Star, right? So go back to my home analogy. It's not a perfect analogy because most organizations will say, okay, we'll just build the whole foundation then, and then we'll build this little corner of the house first. In actuality, what we strive for is almost like a layer cake, right? So you could build it one layer at a time, one complete layer, and stack them on top of each other. But imagine just building one slice of the layer cake at a time, and eventually you have the whole cake put together, right? So it's this idea of what's our constraint and what's the value thesis tied to solving that constraint, or at least improving that constraint. Production throughput, scrap materials going down, things breaking, not getting work accomplished on time, whatever that might be. And then what's the minimally viable technology that can support solving for that North Star? Because if you architect correctly, you're choosing tools, you're choosing systems design that it is additive. You can add, layers onto the house, additions onto the house later on. But that's really difficult for a lot of organizations to arrive at, is instead of implementing all of this stuff, what are the one or two pieces we really need to begin attacking this problem? Because then you have positive ROI from the outset, and it becomes more compelling to invest more. If I know I have a vending machine where every time I put $1 in, I get $2 out, guess what? I'm draining my 401k. I'm just going to stick dollar bills in there until it stops working, right? And the theory with this is eventually you put enough dollar bills in. First you were getting $2, now you're getting $3, now you're getting $4. So you're compounding that value and increasing the increasing the ROI that your organization realizes.
Mm. Yeah, I wish a vending machine like that existed.
Yeah.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. And I totally subscribe to that theory of constraints and have read about a lot about that. And it's a great analogy to how to approach your use of not just technology, but data and making it an initiative to make sure that it's an effective approach. We've seen a lot of companies do exactly what you've said about, boiling the ocean, just taking all their data and, I'm just going to throw it all in here and let's just figure out what to do with it later. And 9 times out of 10, it's just gets very disorganized because they don't know how to approach the use of the data. Like, you can't use the data properly if you don't know how to structure it from day one, right? And so it comes down to trying to figure out first how to structure it, right? And you can't structure it properly if you don't know how you're going to use it. And so, to your point, you know how you're planning on using it first. So now you know what data you need and how to structure it, right?
Exactly. And let's not, it's worth pointing out that it's not anybody's fault. Because when you think about how we used to build data systems back in the day, you've heard of technologies like Teradata, like Hadoop, right? These were big, nasty, especially Teradata, the Clouderas of the world, etc. You were buying infrastructure that lived in your data center alongside all of your other, racks and blades of, your IBM and HP machines spinning. So you were buying all that stuff with CapEx early on. So you almost didn't have a choice but to start that way. I had to acquire all the infrastructure. Then I had to take that sort of waterfall approach. So that's the way that we've always done things before the cloud. And most people who have now been charged with standing up data programs for their organizations have never built one from scratch before. That's something nobody talks about. Like, just build a data program, right? That's really difficult. And most people in VP of IT roles or chief data officer roles in past jobs, they inherited a data infrastructure. So they were just worried about modifying something that was already there, right? Trying to slightly tweak the laws of physics. They weren't creating the laws of physics from scratch, right? That'd like me giving you 10 feet to accelerate, to 60 miles an hour from a dead standstill. Hey, we need this data. We need it now. Just get it. Well, if my job is predicated on delivering insights to you and not building out a firm foundation, and leadership doesn't know what that entails, guess what? I'm going to cut a ton of corners and I'm going to start working on that upstairs game room because I want to keep my job. Right. So there's new technology, there's newfound philosophies, and all of that sort of, it's a Swiss cheese model, right? Like there are going to be gaps, and those gaps are what burn you at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's a really great. Yeah, you're full of great analogies. The Swiss cheese model, I like that.
Yeah, my team loves it.
It's a good one. But you're right. I mean, no one really does think about creating it from scratch, because when I think really starting it from scratch, like, we're in Excel, right? Where there's not that much there. You got to like build it.
Exactly.
And then that's sort of the problem is you get someone else then coming into your Excel, and then things are messy and entered differently, and it's really difficult.
Yeah. And starting, with that waterfall approach, what inevitably is going to happen is that people will rotate through the company. So people will leave, people will come on. Eventually, you're going to be at a point where you're not demonstrating ROI. And what becomes the scapegoat? The technology, your predecessors. I can't believe David built this system this way. He's insane. Well, if you didn't identify that North Star and what you were actually trying to solve, David wasn't wrong. and neither are you.
Yep.
But in the company, we call it narrowing the aperture, right? So companies come to us and they say, I know all of these dominoes need to fall, and I know where I want the last one to fall. I can picture my utopia. Things are automated. I've got a real-time view of my business, right? We don't make any mistakes, and it's all because of this great data we have. But I don't know the first domino that needs to fall to cause that chain reaction across the organization. And that's where people are getting stuck, because once you get started, there's a snowball effect. You train people how to do this stuff. They get excited about it. They trust the data. You empower them to work on their own cool little side projects. Hey, Jesse, look what I built. It can demonstrate how marketing effectiveness across our social media channels is really resonating with these demographics on our LinkedIn live streams, right? Like, that's amazing, but it's all starting with that foundation. It's that first domino, right? What do we need to take this first bite of the elephant, knowing we can add to it later on?
Yeah, a really, really great way to put it. But I'm going to transition us into our third topic. So profit powerhouse. So uniting data, automation, kind of creating that that vision that you were just talking about. How do we do that and create revenue success with it?
I'm going to be the most boring guest you ever had, because it all ties back to the foundation. But this topic really demonstrates to me that we still don't have that common alignment as an industry in terms of what needs to happen for me to unlock some of these capabilities. Because it's never been like, we've been talking about analytics for a hot minute, right? And most people have different varieties of analytics. I've got analytics in HubSpot and in our payment platforms, and I've got it in a ton of other things. Eventually people realize, like, I wish I could see how my HubSpot data impacts my Atlassian, my Jira data, right? And have that data, give that data the ability to cross-pollinate with each other. Because if we're only making decisions based off of a small sliver of our operations, it's sort of like walking around in your house with a match, right? Like, yeah, it's a little clearer, but ultimately I want the lights to turn on, right? So how does this data over here actually relate to this data way over on the other side of the organization? So I can create inferences that otherwise I wouldn't have. Can we actually get really sound marketing attribution as it relates to the products rolling off the line, and give some indication as to how velocity of our assembly lines needs to increase based off of marketing data that we're generating from different channels, right? Totally different worlds. But with this approach, the solid foundation, you can begin to dive into that sort of stuff. And the same goes with automation and AI. I have customers all the time who say, yeah, we understand the importance of it, right? Single source of truth, unified layer. Really, I'm just trying to automate from point A to point B, right? This thing happens over here, chuck it over, and I don't even want to think about it. It's like, yeah, you do. Because anything we're talking about, analytics, automation, AI, its sole purpose is to address these constraints in the business that we're talking about. But guess what? The only constant with constraints in a business is that they'll always exist. So you may just want to solve this one thing today. But unfortunately for everyone, constraints are like that whack-a-mole game at the arcade. They will always be there, and they will always pop up in new areas because you're going to grow. You're going to gather a more diverse customer base, right? You're going to have more employees, more systems. Constraints will always be there. So if you don't have that foundation, you're willing to tell yourself that, yeah, I'm bleeding quite a bit, but like, if I just slap a Band-Aid on it, I'll probably survive for the next day or two. Right. And then I'm really going to have to think about things because it's going to hurt way more.
Yeah.
Right. So all of this stuff, AI, automation, analytics, forecasting, predictions, what have you, it all ties back to to that firm foundation. And I stress this so much because 17 years into this and over 1,000 workloads into this, it's where people skimp. It's the chapters of the book they want to just skip over and get to the juicy part where the guy gets killed, right? And they ignore the setup and like why it matters. So, that's why I talk about this so much. It's not flashy. It's inherently the least cool part of building data capabilities, but it's absolutely the most important part.
And I think to your point of your analogy with the match, I think the right thing to do, right, is to turn the lights on one room at a time, right? I mean, that's really, your goal might be to turn on all the lights in the entire building, but you can't get there.
Exactly.
You got to turn on lights in one room at a time.
Yeah, even if you find a lantern on the way to finding where that first light switch is, that might be good enough for a little bit before you run out of fuel in the lamp, So I couldn't agree more. That's a great analogy that I'm definitely going to steal.
No problem.
It's true, because then if you try to turn everything on at once, you're going to have a big mess, right? Especially with automation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So to kind of summarize on Profit Powerhouse for our audience, so basically the cross-pollination of data between systems was a big part of what I heard, but then also just the total overall foundation, because let's admit it, humans are lazy and we like to just skip over what we don't have to do. And a lot of the times we think we don't have to do certain things in data, but we actually do.
Well, and think about it, right? And I'm speaking as a reformed software engineer, right? My team wouldn't let me touch the keyboard with a 10-foot pole these days in good form because they're way better at it than I am. But we can't ignore who engineers are as people. They like to build stuff. And that's part of the reason why engineers are awesome. But ignoring, right? If it's the same as, here's another analogy, like you cut down a tree, right? If you have 30 minutes to cut down a tree and you grab a dull axe and just start swinging, it'll never fall. But if you spend the first 15 minutes sharpening it, maybe you get it done with an additional 6 or 7 minutes. So the foundation is important, but it also ties back to that North Star I talked about earlier. Because what we see is that a lot of organizations go, all right, Jesse, we want to be data-driven, make it happen. Go disappear into that supply closet for a couple months. And like, when you come out of there, we better be able to make real-time decisions with our data. And that's really, that's an extreme, but that's really how it happens today, right? Like get leadership involved once you have something to show us, right? And that North Star ties back into the why, right? Because building the system is the what. And the approach you take and the tools you select is the how. But the most important thing is the why. That's so Simon Sinek right there, right?
So true.
Shout out to him. But if you don't understand what this will do for your business and create a hypothesis around it, it's not worth doing. But if I can say, we have the opportunity to cut our scrap in half as an organization, and we know that will add $4 million a year back to the bottom line, that's worth it now. And you would spend a reasonable investment to make that happen. That's a $4 million a year annuity. But unless you have that, you have nothing. And that lack of direction goes back to what we talked about earlier of things just never getting done. And you've just got a very expensive R&D experiment that you need to explain to your board.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's all really great insights. Thank you for going into that and for sharing it. So, I don't know, it's just very easy the way you put it into analogies and stories. It's very easy to consume. So if you're not a data professional, this is a good episode for you. But Collin, I'm curious. This is something we ask all of the guests that come on Deconstructing Data. So you've mentioned, lots of different tools, lots of different, different tech. But what is your favorite? What are your favorite tools in your tech stack?
And I told you all on the call that I wasn't going to play middle of the road and say something like Slack, although It's definitely my most leveraged tool on my day-to-day.
Yeah.
So let's mix it up. I think from a data tool standpoint, there are two. I really like what Snowflake is doing. I'm a big believer in Snowflake as a data warehouse, data platform. Pay as you go, consumption, very easy in terms of creature comforts for your development team. That's awesome. Another tool I'm going to shout out that people will know the parent company, but probably not the tool, is Amazon QuickSight. When you talk about that reporting layer, that analytics layer, everyone knows Amazon and AWS. A lot fewer people know about QuickSight and what they're doing in the industry. And their mission is to create the simplest, most affordable BI tool that the world has ever seen, but still pack it full of technical sophistication. And they're doing that. Yeah. They're doing a great job, and it's fun to watch them grow. We work with their team a lot. On a personal front, like I told you guys before, right? I've been under a load of stress since I was 18 years old and first joined the military. So I have been a long time Whoop subscriber, maybe for 6 or 7 years. So you get your biometric band and it reads all of your stuff and tells you how your body is responding to different stress, which is helpful for me in my work life, my personal life, my other ambitions outside of work, like, racing cars and things like that. I spend a lot of time in that platform trying to sort of draw inference from different decisions I make and how I'm going about my daily life to make me better. So
I love that.
Yeah.
That's really cool. What did you call it? Whoop?
It's called Whoop, WHOOP. There are others out there too. Aura, right? You can buy the Aura ring.
I've heard of that one. Yeah.
These biometric, Ultra Human's another one. But just being able to collect some of that data on, how I'm living and the choices I'm making, it's insane. The little things that you do where you're like, oh, my body loves that. Like, I know I can't eat past 7 p.m.
Oh,
my body hates it. And if I drink, I try not to drink too much to begin with. If I drink after 3 p.m., my body hates it. So if I can, just these simple habits that I can work to incorporate is really impactful, right? Meditation, breathing, that sort of stuff. Like, being able to have the data to say, when you do this, your body responds in this very positive way. And when you stay out till 2 a.m. in Las Vegas at a conference, drinking whatever with your buddies and pretending like it's a good idea, it's not a good idea. That's, these sorts of things just help reinforce decisions for me. And that's really what organizations are trying to solve with their data, as well as reinforcing decisions to optimize their global capabilities.
Oh, it's all full circle. That's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Collin.
Yeah, full Tarantino moment for us.
Yeah, really. You brought it all back around there.
Yeah, that's good stuff. I have heard of Whoop. I haven't tried it. I don't know anybody directly, so I've never really seen it in action. We use QuickSight, and I agree with you. Like QuickSight, we do a lot with QuickSight.
Yeah,
all of our internal reporting and everything is with QuickSight, so I can pretty much get a good handle of what's going on with a lot of things with the different dashboards that we have in QuickSight.
Fun fact: North Labs was the very first QuickSight partner in the world.
Ooh,
we sold the first ever enterprise deal of QuickSight with a PowerPoint slide deck because the platform wasn't yet built. So, two pretty cool stories. It's come a long way since they first rolled it out in 2016, and it's pretty remarkable what they're doing with that roadmap.
Yeah, for sure. Very cool.
That is really cool. Well, in closing, Collin, would you like to tell listeners how they could find you if they wanted to reach out after the show?
Sure. And they're probably sick of me by now talking about, data foundations and stuff like that. But I don't have any social media other than LinkedIn. So find me there, /in/Collin with 2 L's, Graves, like dead people. Happy to connect there and carry on the conversation. If you are a business that is maybe in a position that I described, at any point during this conversation, you can go to buildmydatablueprint.com, and that will lead you to our free sort of 4-week discovery initiative that we do with organizations to help build the blueprint of that house we were talking about. What tools to use, what your value thesis is, what that North Star is, how you need to think about, accomplishing these goals in a sort of project plan basis. It's just a great way for us to build relationships with people. And at the end of it, you have the whole blueprint you need to go build the house yourself if you want, or to hire another architect to do it. But we love to just share our knowledge with other decision makers in the industry.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. And I have to ask, because you've said North Star, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 times this episode. Is that tie into the name North Labs, or how did you come up with North Labs?
Yeah, North Labs, you're like, that doesn't sound like data at all. So fun fact, when I first started this company, it didn't start as what it is today, which is a continuation of my last group. It was originally going to be an incubation fund for startups in the Minnesota market. There's so many great health tech companies up there because of the presence of Mayo and right, they call it Medical Alley up in Minnesota. Very quickly realized that I wanted to keep building data solutions, but we kept the name, and we make a lot of reference to my hometown because I don't live there now, but I've got a lot of love for Minneapolis and that state as a whole. So simple way to pay homage.
Absolutely.
Nice.
Well, I like how you tie in North Star because it feels very branded to me as you were saying it. So I was just curious.
That means a lot coming from you in your position. That's yeah.
I think you could play with it a lot. The
Yeah.
North Star. Yeah, there's some ideas floating up there that I've got. But no, this has been a really great conversation, Collin. Thank you so much for joining us. And audience members, real quick before we go, I'm going to pull up a QR code because we're very advanced here too, Collin, with QR codes. So if you scan the screen, if you're watching, this will take you over to bedex.com. But if you're not watching and you're listening on podcast, simply go over to bedex.com. And we want to help you build authentic connections with your audience and drive unprecedented engagement with quality data and AI. So imagine harnessing the power of AI to craft your audiences. So as a marketer, I can tell you, coming up with your audience is sometimes the hardest part of a marketing campaign. So just imagine taking quality data and AI to build off all these different points to find your exact audience that you want to target. So let's bring you closer to that North Star, as Collin was saying, and bring you closer to your marketing goals. We're eager to guide you as well. So just simply visit bedex.com, click on Talk to an Expert, and get powered by Bedex. And also, real quick, if you're curious about deconstructing data, we would love to hear from you. We have a couple opportunities. We're just an email away. We've started collecting audience data ourselves. So if you would like to talk to us about getting in front of our audience, we are starting to entertain the ideas of sponsorships. And we'd be glad to share our segments with you. If you're interested, just email us at info@bedex.com. And also, we get some of the best guests from you, our listeners. So if you know someone who would be a good guest on this show, please feel free to send their name our way. It's info@bedex.com. Share your qualitative data with us so we can make it better for you. And thanks again so much, Collin.
Absolutely. This is great, y'all. Appreciate it.
Likewise. Yeah. Thank you, Collin. It was great having you on the show. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.